The world is changing extremely fast right now, in ways that can feel both exciting and overwhelming. So, how do we find balance in all of this? I'm Stephanie van Bismarck, activist, author, and digital educator. Welcome to my podcast, where each week I sit down with some of the world's best thinkers, trailblazers, and extraordinary people to find ways to help us all thrive and answer the big question, how do we manage? In this episode, we're diving into relationships, boundaries, burnout, and everything in between. My guest is Casey Davis. She's the creator behind Struggle Care, a platform which created a huge sense of community for people having difficulties coping with life overwhelmed during the pandemic. Off the back of that movement, she wrote her first book, How to Keep House While Drowning, which went on to become an Amazon bestseller. Her new book asks a really powerful question. Who deserves your love? In our chat, we discuss how to understand and set boundaries, what we can expect from our relationships, and what we need to accept as something outside our own area of control and responsibility. She has so much great advice. I hope you'll take as much from our conversation as I did. Casey Davis, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure and honor to have you here on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Tell me a little more about where this all started for you. What is Struggle Care and how did you come to create that platform?
Yeah, so I gave birth to my second baby like 3 weeks before my state of Texas shut down for the pandemic in 2020. And I'm a therapist professionally. And so I had this huge postpartum plan to support my mental health. And of course, when everything shut down, I couldn't do it anymore, right? There's no meals being delivered or play dates or, family flying in. And so things got really difficult. And I suffered from some postpartum depression. And I found this outlet on TikTok kind of talking about mental health. And specifically at that time, talking about how difficult it was for me to keep my house clean with, 2 little kids and postpartum depression. And I started kind of coming up with these, in my mind, kind of weird little hacks. I have adult ADHD. And, for that reason, a lot of cleaning advice never worked for me. When people were like, oh, just clean as you go. My brain doesn't do that.
Make an example. I just want to understand, just a tiny example for the listeners to understand why it's different.
Yeah. So, the part of my brain that is different with ADHD is this part called executive functioning. So things like time management and working memory and being able to kind of think out the steps of things are different. So when people would say, well, just clean as you go, just do a little load of laundry every day, sometimes if you don't have ADHD, you can kind of make yourself do these little habits. And they take a lot of energy at first, but then eventually they become automatic. But for me, they never become automatic. So I'm having to use all of this energy to do these simple things. And by the end of the day, I'm exhausted and I'm kind of burnt out. And so I started coming up with these funny ways to do things. And one of the kind of funny ways that I did things was I didn't worry about cleaning throughout the day. But then at the end of the day, or even at the end of the week, I would stand there and I would look at my house that looked like a bomb went off in it. And instead of being overwhelmed by how much stuff there was, I would think to myself, there's only 5 things in this room. Okay. In any room, ever. Okay. There's only ever trash, dishes, laundry, things that have a place that need to be put away, and things that don't really have a place to go.
Okay.
And when I thought of it that way, there was something in my brain that really likes patterns and categories. And it became this little ritual where I wasn't overwhelmed because I didn't think, oh, I don't know where to start, or this is going to take so long. I could just kind of put myself on autopilot, pick up all the trash first, then pick up all the laundry, then pick up all the dishes. And so I started sharing these hacks on social media. And it just kind of blew up. People really appreciated not only the hacks, but also this idea that messiness is morally neutral. We have addiction in my family. And so I had a lot of struggles when I was growing up, when I was a young child, and they kind of came to a head when I was 15. I ended up with a pretty severe drug addiction to cocaine and crystal meth and marijuana and mushrooms and really just anything I could get my hands on. And I ended up in a long-term rehab when I was 16
Oh, wow.
for 18 and a half months of inpatient intensive psychological treatment. And this really, I mean, that's like a foundational time in a child's life, right? That kind of teenage
Very.
years. And I just kind of had to rethink everything. I had to rethink how I did relationships. I had to rethink how I looked at myself and how I interacted with the world. And it was really difficult, but it also kind of kicked off this trajectory in my life of kind of personal growth. That's kind of what inspired me to become a therapist myself. And I think has kind of made me the person that I am today.
When did you get diagnosed with ADHD?
So interestingly, that didn't happen until I was about 35.
Okay, as so often these days one hears that. Yeah.
And what was really interesting was to look back all the way even to my rehab days
Yeah.
and to see the things that I used to get like in trouble for
Yeah.
that everybody treated as though it was like a moral failing or an immaturity or an irresponsibility. And one example is like I used to interrupt people a lot. Someone would be talking and I'd cut them off and answer them.
Yeah.
And when I was in rehab, I used to get a lot of these, they call them concerns, right? Like,
Okay.
hey, we're concerned at this behavior. And what they told me was, this is a behavior that you're doing because you're selfish
Yeah.
and you're self-absorbed and you're arrogant. And if you don't learn to be humble, you're never going to kind of get on top of this addiction.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. And so fast forward, it's now been 20 years. I've been sober 20 years. I'm a pretty healthy person. And turns out that kind of interrupting is just ADHD.
Very ADHD, yeah.
And I'm not saying like, oh, and so I should always be able to interrupt everybody no matter what they feel. Like, obviously, we have to consider people's feelings in our relationships. But the starting point of how I should be addressing that behavior should never have been, you are broken and this is selfish of you. And so get it together and bite your tongue. It should have been, this is just a way that your brain works differently. It's morally neutral. And there are some people that love to have those kinds of conversations where you're constantly interrupting. And there are other people whose brains are different than yours. Then they feel kind of run over and they feel like you don't like them or consider them. And how can we have a relationship with people that honors and respects who I am and the way my brain works, but also considers other people's feelings and experiences?
So then you became a professional, like a therapist, to take it on to heal others and help others, I guess.
Yeah.
And then you start writing your first book.
Yes. So the first book was How to Keep House While Drowning.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an amalgamation of all those different hacks of cleaning, as well as that self-compassion narrative that, again, yes, there might be some things we need to change here, but the starting point should be self-compassion and self-acceptance. And then the last book that I wrote was Who Deserves Your Love? And it's just a continuation of this idea of like, okay, we've looked at our home, but let's take that same philosophy into our relationships.
Okay. So the area of your latest book I really wanted to dive into is boundaries. Just explain what it is and why is it such a fascination for you?
I spent most of my career as a therapist talking about boundaries. I worked as an addiction therapist. I ran drug rehabs. But my favorite thing to do was to develop and run programs for family members that needed help with kind of their loved one that was struggling with addiction. And so we talked a lot about boundaries in that.
Okay.
And when I would talk about cleaning, it would always kind of end up where somebody would go, okay, but what do I do if my roommate doesn't see things this way? Or I'm having a lot of conflict with my spouse about cleaning because they think this and I think this, and they think that I'm lazy. And so it's interesting. Like people would sometimes say like, well, it's just cleaning. How could it be that deep? But everything is connected to everything.
Well, I'd say there are many struggles in households about cleaning.
Yeah.
Who does what and the constant fight about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can you help me define boundary, and especially what is it in comparison to, for example, a request or even an ultimatum?
Yeah. So boundaries is my favorite topic because I have a slightly different view on it than a lot of other people. And that I would define a boundary as the understanding of where I end and you begin. So it's not just what I'm telling people to do or what I'm asking people to do. We often think, well, if, let's say you have a friend that is making comments about your weight. And we think to ourselves, well, the boundary is, hey, stop talking about my weight. Or you have a spouse that's maybe raising their voice and you say, hey, this is a boundary for me. Don't raise your voice. We often want to make a boundary like limits we're putting on someone else's behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that if we understand boundaries as not what we're doing or what we're saying, but an internal understanding of what do I have agency over? What can I influence? What am I responsible for? And when does that responsibility end? So if we're friends, I do have a responsibility to listen to you and to try and understand you, especially if you're talking about how my behavior is impacting you. But at the same time, I can't just use your viewpoint as the ultimate be all and end all, because we've all been in a situation where someone's going, you hate me, you're just trying to punish me. And a good example of this is, I think when you think about like new parents and they're trying to say, okay, we don't want anyone to see the baby for the first 3 days, or we'd really like you to get the vaccine before you see the babies. And we've all been in a situation where, someone goes, well, you're just trying to control me. Well, you're being unreasonable. And so it's like, okay, well, that I don't think that's true. So how do we have these relationships where we understand that their reaction is their reaction and they're responsible for managing their emotions about it? And yet we do have some responsibility to consider what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing.
Of course. A lot of people feel guilt when setting boundaries, especially in caring roles. What helps for that specific topic?
So when we think about boundaries, let's take you and me, for example. There's kind of this invisible line where my feelings end and your feelings begin. And so if I want to ask you to do something and I feel guilty about it, well, guilt is a feeling that it can be very helpful. It's like a little alarm system, right? It tells you when you're doing something against your values. And for that reason, it's very beneficial. Like if I scream at you and then later I go, ooh, I feel really guilty about that. That's a good thing. That's my emotions telling me, hey, Casey, that's not who you want to be. The problem is that sometimes we can have a faulty alarm system, right? Sometimes all I did was say, hey, do you mind not calling me after 6 p.m. because I'm really off the clock at 6 p.m. and I want to, have my family time. And then we go, oh, I just feel so guilty about that. I just feel so guilty asking for something that I need. And that's kind of a false alarm because you haven't transgressed your values. So then where's that guilt coming from? Well, that guilt is I feel bad that I have made someone else sort of feel awkward or feel burdened or feel inconvenienced or put them in a position to possibly feel exposed or to change something that they're doing. And in that situation is where we would say, well, that's not actually my responsibility. My responsibility is to ask for what I need. It's not necessarily to manage the reaction that someone has to that. And sometimes we manage that reaction after the fact. So we say it and then we go, but it's okay if not. But if you really need me, I guess call. But sometimes we manage that reaction preemptively.
I would just guess that women have more difficulties setting boundaries because they want to do everything right and then they overexert themselves. So
Yeah.
what advice do you give, for example, a people pleaser?
I like to share the story of the first time I was working with a mentor. And I said, wow, yeah, Dara, I'm really a people pleaser. I'm just such a people pleaser. And she looked at me and went, honey, look around. Ain't nobody pleased. And I was like, oh. And I think sometimes when we struggle with people pleasing, there's a real tendency to kind of become a little bit of a martyr.
Yeah.
Oh, I do so much for everyone. I'm just so kind-hearted. I just
And I
people
don't get
take
back.
advantage of me.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be careful there because really what's at the heart of people-pleasing behavior is that I manage my emotions by making people like me. That's how I manage my own emotional regulation. When I feel like someone doesn't like me or they think poorly of me, that really makes me feel very reactive, very anxious, very withdrawn, very nervous. And I don't like feeling that way. So, what I do is that I go out and I manage other people's emotions. I manage their opinions of me. I manage their approval of me. And in the end, it's not really about taking care of other people. It's about managing other people's emotions in order to take care of me.
And why do you think women have a harder time with this often?
I think most places in the world, women experience this messaging from our culture that says that being a caretaker, being sweet, being there for other people is like the best thing that a woman could be. When there's been sometimes some informal polls where people will say, if you ask men what do they love about their partners, it's really interesting to hear how many times they identify what their partner does for other people or for them. And I think sometimes we reward men and boys for the things they do for themselves. Oh, an entrepreneur, the go-getter, the leader, going out there and taking, trailblazing. And we tend to reward women for tending to others' needs. Oh, my mother, she's a saint, always doing for others.
So what do you think if you were a mom of a daughter who's comparably little still? What are the best messages? What can we really, give them that they don't become like that?
Yeah, one of the ones that I struggle with, because I have two little girls and they're 5 and 7, and when they fight, it drives my patience through the roof because I get really overstimulated by the yelling and so there's this drive to want to just say, like, stop arguing, stop arguing, stop arguing. But the truth is there's nothing wrong with conflict. Right? I have to make myself slow down and enter into their argument and say, well, what are y'all arguing about? How can I help you? But not to say, quit arguing. And I think even when it comes to praise, I try to be very careful about what I praise about my kids, especially like oldest daughters. It's easy to find ourselves going, I love how you help your sisters. You're so kind. I love how sweet you are. And all those things are great. But I go out of my way to praise when she stands up for herself, to praise when she asks for something that she needs, especially if I'm, maybe I'm in a mood and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. She's like, but mommy, I'm not going to. And she goes, Mom, you're not listening to me. And I stop for a second. She says, what I was going to say was ABC, right? I make sure to say, thank you for pushing.
That's good. That's really valuable advice for any moms with daughters out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess grown-up women too. We can still learn. We can still learn from that. Well, how has your ADHD, was that any special with the own boundaries you had to sort of shape and create in your life?
Absolutely. I think, one of them was a lot of people with ADHD struggle with what we call rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is that we tend to interpret neutral interactions as rejection.
Okay.
And we feel it very deeply. And so not just, ooh, that kind of stung, but almost like a normal little, hey, I'm walking away from a conversation and I'm not sure if I said the right things.
Yeah.
Or if I ask, hey, do you want to hang out? Oh, not tonight. I think I'm going to do XYZ. I might feel that really deeply and almost spin out about it.
Okay.
And kind of feel panicky about it. And that can make it really difficult when dealing with boundaries because part of boundaries is recognizing, okay, I'm having all these feelings and my job is really to sit with those feelings.
Yeah.
And to learn how to self-soothe and to work through what I'm thinking and feeling and kind of what is real inside of me versus what is real between the two of us. Because it's all real. It's all valid.
Yeah.
But it's it's too easy to just react, to kind of knee-jerk react in those situations and create conflict and make it worse. It's much harder to just sit with those feelings. And so that's been, I think, the biggest challenge in being a person with ADHD and having to manage to kind of being a sensitive person.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I guess, for example, in relationships or any relationships, personal boundaries clash. When is it okay to give up on those boundaries just to also, to make it work?
Such a great question. And I think also kind of taps into the other thing about boundaries, that we need to shift our perspective, because we really want boundaries to be this like objective judge of who's right and who's wrong. So for example, let's say that we have a married couple and she says, or they're in a fight and he says, I'm not going to talk about this, and tries to walk away. And she says, well, you can't walk away from me. This is a boundary for me. You can't walk away. And he goes, well, I need to walk away. I'm too overwhelmed. It's a boundary for me that I need to take space when I need space. And so then you're going, okay, well, so whose boundary wins there? And I think that's kind of where we get stuck.
Okay. Yeah.
But boundaries isn't meant to say who's right and who's wrong, whose needs are more important. And they're really meant to say, let's stop this kind of position of being adversarial, of trying to decide who's right and who's wrong. And let's figure out how we can look at why I'm feeling activated, what I feel like my needs are. And is there a way that we can stop kind of looking at each other across the table and come sit on the same side as each other, look at the conflict we're having and ask ourselves, how can we collaborate so that both of us feel cared for and both of us feel heard?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. To set those things aside and just try and make it work together somehow.
Yeah. And so I think an example of what that might look like for that couple is, slowing down and listening without reacting, but then saying, okay, so we have one person that really needs space when they feel overwhelmed, and we have another person that really needs reassurance when they feel overwhelmed. So what we can do, though, is that if a person can learn how to ask for reassurance in a way that's not accusatory, so just stop and go, I feel like I'm spinning out. I need some reassurance that you care about this. And that person that needs space can learn to say, hey, pause. I love you and I care about this, but I need to take a walk.
That is so important. My God. I mean, and it's just sometimes so difficult to find the right words, because that communication would, open, gates, really, not even doors. But It's just not easy to learn that right conversation to make other people understand where one is.
And that's the hardest part, is that at the end of the day, we can't really make someone understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can only make a good faith effort to explain ourselves.
Yeah. You talk about the vulnerability cycle. What is that?
So the vulnerability cycle is one of my favorite concepts in marriage therapy, because it talks about how it's not just about what issues are you bringing to the table or what issues am I bringing to the table and whose fault is something. It's about the fact that everyone has issues. And when your issues and my issues interact, they create a very unique cycle. So the way that we can think about it is that all of us have sensitivities and vulnerabilities. And so they're usually shaped by, and if like a layman's term for this might be like insecurities, but it's a little bit deeper than that. So we all have things that we feel a little bit insecure about. We feel a little bit sensitive about, feel a little bit vulnerable. And for example, let's go with the idea of having ADHD. So a lot of kids that have ADHD, whether they're diagnosed or undiagnosed, grow up getting a lot of messages about being disorganized, maybe about being stupid or being lazy because of the things that they struggle with. And so because of that, some of us will develop a sensitivity or a vulnerability to feeling as though someone thinks that we're stupid, or to sounding stupid or seeming stupid. And there might be, I could be with a friend and be joking around, and she could joke about how, my skirt looks funny. And I could laugh that off. Oh, it does kind of look funny. And she could joke about how, I stumbled on the sidewalk and fell. And I would go, that was really funny, and laugh. And then she could go, and also you mispronounced that word. And right? All of a sudden that hits a
Yeah.
vulnerability, right? And so everybody has those, right? Maybe it's from your family of origin. Maybe you had a dad that yelled a lot, and now you have a real vulnerability around men being angry or men yelling. Maybe you grew up without, maybe some food insecurity, and now you have a real vulnerability around food or the way you look when you eat or any of these things. And sometimes it's just societal. And most women have a vulnerability around body image because of the amount of value we put on that. So then we have this second set of that's like those are internal things, right? And then we develop these defense mechanisms in order to cope with those sensitivities. So if I'm someone who has a sensitivity to feeling stupid, maybe one of my defense mechanisms and the way I cope with that is that, I went and got a master's degree and I use really big words and I really try very hard to manage the way that people perceive my intelligence. And we also develop these in relation to other people. So let's say that you're someone who was bullied a lot and you learned early on, okay, if I just don't show any reaction, it's a little bit like if I show this bully that I'm sad, that I'm upset, that I'm vulnerable, the bullying gets worse. So you learn to shut down. This could be anything. Maybe you had a really critical mom and you learn, okay, you know what? If I just make myself really small, the criticism stops. Well, now you're grown up, you're in a relationship with someone, they're having an issue. They're saying that issue to you. You're hearing maybe even just valid criticism as rejection and criticism the way your mom used to do. And so you use that defense mechanism of shutting down and shutting out. The problem is, what happens when your defense mechanism of shutting down and shutting out gets interpreted by somebody that maybe has a sensitivity around being ignored?
Yeah, that sounds like a bad mix.
And that's a really common one that we see is where somebody has a sensitivity. And some of this, it's not always around gendered lines, but some of it, as we talked about earlier, can be kind of gendered because of the way we gender, society, things like that, where you will often have one person who has a really high sensitivity to rejection and criticism and feeling like they can never be good enough. And their defense mechanism is to be really passive and not try very hard so they can't be criticized and just shut down to protect themselves. Where the other person has sensitivities around not being good enough, specifically related to you're not worth the effort. I don't care. You're not important enough. And so when they see their loved one shutting down, the story that they tell themselves about that behavior is, see, they don't care enough.
Yeah.
See, I'm not good enough. See, I'll always be the one begging for more and I'll never get it. And that, of course, feeds that sensitivity and heightens that panicky feeling and makes us more apt to do our defense mechanism. So maybe my next defense mechanism is I'm going to lash out. And see, you've always been lazy. You are the worst partner in the world, right? I'm going to get mean because maybe that's the defense mechanism that I developed to deal with that feeling. And of course, then you have this person who's now kind of being yelled at going, now they have a story. They're not looking at their partner and going, wow, my partner's really hurting because they don't feel secure and they're lashing out. Ideally, we could have those kind of truths, but the story that they tell themselves is, see, I'll never be good enough. See, they are a crazy psycho. See, I can never do anything right in there. And so we get locked in these reactive cycles with each other. And it really hinges around the story that we tell ourselves about each other's defense mechanisms.
And how do we get out of that? What can we do? How can we work on ourselves to not let that happen or get out of it as fast as possible?
Yeah. I think the first step before we even jump into how do we fix it is to take a deep breath, right? And to remember that this is a very human experience, that all humans have sensitivities and vulnerabilities and defense mechanisms. There's nothing broken about you. And that we're never going to be entirely free of vulnerabilities and defense mechanisms. And that's actually a good thing. You don't have to grow all the way up and heal all the way out in order to start having better relationships and better emotional well-being. All we want to do is slow down that cycle. And the way that we do that is step number one is by challenging the stories that we're telling ourselves. So my story is, he is a cold-hearted monster that doesn't care about me. Okay. What if that wasn't the case? Now, maybe we don't know what the real story is. And ideally, with your really close relationships, you can, at a time where everyone's not heated, have a conversation where you try to understand more about their reaction. So maybe you learn some about their backstory and you kind of understand those things. And we're not changing the story in order to justify their inappropriate behavior. That's really important. So we're not, someone's screaming at us and we're not going, oh, well, he can't help it because his mom was so mean to him. That's not what we're doing.
No.
What we're doing is we're changing the story to slow down our reactions so that we change it from a story about our worth to a story about their struggle.
Yeah.
So that I don't react with, I'm not good enough. I can get a little bit of space to go, okay, they're reacting this way. They're having a hard time. This is their behavior. This is not about me not being good enough. And so that gives me the space to practice my own emotional regulation, take care of my own feelings and sort of panic in that moment, because we do truly go into fight or flight in these moments of conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
And fight or flight is what drives our defense mechanisms. And so if we can get some space and some self-soothing between when we feel our sensitivities activated and when we jump into those defense mechanisms, and use that to choose a different coping skill that will kind of won't make the situation worse or won't make us act in a way that we feel guilt about or regret later.
Yeah.
We can begin to slow down that cycle and experience better well-being. And in an ideal situation, and in many situations, you can invite the other person to do the same. And if both people are working on it, you can really slow down that cycle, really address some of these behaviors that you're hurting each other with. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just you working on you. And then you have to answer some hard questions about what do you do next.
I love this. This is like the free therapy session with you today for everyone who's listening too.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the online presence. You have a massive online following. It's like, how do you manage your own sort of boundaries? Where do you draw the line? How do you keep your own energy with you?
Well, I am aware of what my sensitivities are. And that can be helpful because there's a lot of comments that, people on the internet can be really mean.
Very, yeah.
And they're either mean because they're immature or they're mean because they themselves are maybe triggered by something they've heard in a video that didn't make them feel very good, even though it was the truth.
Yeah.
And there's so many kind of hate comments that people can make that really roll off my back. But then there is kind of a subsection of them that really get to me.
Yeah,
because they hit on those sensitivities, right? And, you can feel a lot of shame about that. Like, oh, I'm losing because they're really getting to me. And I try really hard to remember that this isn't about winning or losing. Like, the fact that people have the ability to wound me doesn't mean that I'm losing anything. It just means that I'm human.
Yeah.
It's a myth that I could be so enlightened that nobody's behavior could ever hurt me.
Yeah.
It's a lie.
And that would also not be good, right?
Yeah. Like, it's not true that nobody can make you feel anything. Like, we were made for relationships. You should be affected by people's behavior. People who are not affected at all by other people's behavior are psychopaths.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
I'm saying, that's their problem, is that they can't feel any kind of empathy or anything about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's part of it, is recognizing I know when a comment is kind of getting me. And the other really big boundary, which has been like the most important boundary to me, especially being online, is the boundary that people are allowed to misunderstand me.
Okay. Yeah, that's
because sometimes somebody's in good faith saying, I don't understand this. Yeah. And I love to have discussions and explain things and answer objections. And I love to argue, right? But I have to recognize when someone is not arguing in good faith. They don't want to change their mind. They're not open to learning anything. In fact, they're just intentionally misunderstanding me at this point. And am I going to allow my need to be right to drive this? I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose face. I want to win. Or am I going to take a step back and go, I literally cannot control this person's opinion of this.
No.
It might drive me nuts.
You're going to pick your battles.
Yeah, like they're allowed to misunderstand me. They're allowed to walk away from this interaction and think that I am the stupidest person they have ever seen in their life.
Yeah. Speaking online, comparison is something we basically are all struggling with. How does it show up in your relationships? And how do we keep it from distorting what's real?
I love this concept of comparison because like anything that kind of makes itself into the like cultural zeitgeist pop psychology, like there's a lot of very real truth when we say, don't compare. The grass is always greener on the other side. Like, I think we're pretty good as a society about talking about that because we get it. We compare. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not this enough, whatever. But I think the part that we kind of need like a backstop is that when we're comparing relationships, you can compare your relationship to others in a way that's not helpful, and you can compare in a way that's helpful. So, like, I remember one time there were some videos going around where these girls were making these videos about how their boyfriends had made them like, I think they were calling them like boo baskets, where boyfriends had gone to Target and gotten made a gift basket of like cozy socks and a candle and a whatever and got it for them. And then people would start to talk about like, man, I wish I had a partner that did that. I wish I had a partner that did that. And I came across this video one time of this girl who was saying, here's my list of what I want in a partner. And I thought, well, this is good. We should have standards. But her list was like someone that makes me boo baskets, someone that does this, someone that does this. And they were really specific.
Oh, wow. It was following trends, internet trends.
And I remember thinking like, are there partners out there that like that is the natural expression of their care is like to go make a boo basket? Yes. And that's really sweet and really cute. But just because a partner doesn't do that specific expression of care doesn't mean that they're not being caring. And my joke was that I think I said, some of you sound like you're more interested in dating a sorority big sister than you are dating like a real life person. Like you just want someone to like decorate your locker.
Yeah.
And like that's not realistic. Maybe for some personality types it is. And if you are dead set on having just one personality type, okay. But you've really shrunk the pool there. I think that what we need to do is be comparing values. Because I've also kind of seen this go the other way, where I've seen, I think women in particular say, well, my husband doesn't, ever compliment me, but he always mows the lawn. He always pays the bills. And it's kind of like, ooh, wait a second, let's back up, right? Sometimes when you're looking at somebody else's relationship and you're going, gosh, I wish mine was like that, you're drawing a comparison that's unfair and you're not looking at what you really have. But sometimes when you're going, wow, my relationship doesn't look anything like that, sometimes that's the correct conclusion. Like sometimes the conclusion is, oh, there's something wrong in my relationship. I need to have different standards. I need to have conversations here. And the trick is really to kind of learn, how do I do that? How do I make sure I'm not just always like wanting something just because I don't have it? And how do I make sure that I'm not justifying really behavior that's not acceptable?
But how much of things are also sometimes unrealistic? The comparison with anyone's lives who are always, portrayed in a fantastic way online is, I would argue, harmful for my own life, because truth be told, no one's life is perfect and no one's partner is perfect. Neither are we.
I totally agree with you. And kind of along those same lines, like what we see online isn't real. It's not real, like what people are showing us. Like it's little snippets. And it kind of also reminds me of like I'm a huge romantasy reader. Like I love to read fantasy romance. And, when you look at your like book boyfriends and everything they do is perfect and everything they do is romantic and everything they do is, and you can kind of be like, wow, man, my real life partner doesn't do that. And I remember telling someone one time, like, I actually have a partner that is incredibly romantic, that like writes love notes and thinks that like we're soulmates and does all these things. And like he still stinks up the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we don't have like a realistic view about like what it's actually like to have a man like that, because like there's still boredom, there's still fighting, there's still, all of these other things. And so I think the key is this, and this is what I talk about in the book, is that when you see something and you feel that pang of envy, of like, I wish I had that, instead of taking that, quote unquote, on its face, ask yourself, what is that representing? So whether it's the boo basket or the love notes or someone who's really, doing whatever, what does that represent to you? And so if it's a boo basket, okay, what represents someone who is considerate, who thinks about what I like? Okay, so then if you're in a relationship, we want to ask ourselves, where do I see my current partner, or even friends really, where do I see my current friend or relationship being considerate of my needs? And look for that. And sometimes you'll realize, oh, they like, so for my husband, he would never in a million years make a boo basket. But every time he stops at the convenience store on the way home, he buys me a red Gatorade because he knows it's my favorite drink. And he brings it home and I drink a third of it and then it rots on my bedside table. And then the next night he does the same thing. And he teases me mercilessly about how the fact I never finished them, but he still buys me the new one. And so that's not some big, huge romantic gesture. That's not, a gift basket with fuzzy socks. But I can find all of these examples of him being considerate. Sometimes you're going to do that exercise and you're going to go, wow, I'm struggling to come up with examples. There's no examples. And so this can be anything. This can be, wow, look how physically affectionate that couple is. I wish my partner was physically affectionate like that. Okay, well, what does physical affection represent? It represents, this could be different for everyone. Maybe it's romance, maybe it's connection. Maybe is it specific about public affection? Is it really about feeling like someone's proud to be with you? Right? Really drill down on what that means for you and then go looking for evidence of that in your relationship and see if you can find it. Because if you can't find it, maybe that comparison is kind of waking you up to something. If you can find it and you're going, well, then why do I still feel this kind of the grass is greener on the other side? Well, then maybe that's your work that you need to be doing, right? Maybe that's kind of that phobo or whatever you like, the fear of a bet. Like maybe that's the kind of the lie that if you had something else, you'd feel better. Because at the end of the day, like there's going to be dissatisfaction and boredom in life. That's how life is. We can't just always be changing so that we can kind of live from high to high. And there will occasionally be times when you do that and you go, oh, okay, there are examples. But man, I think it actually really matters to me that it's not that specific example. That might be true. And then you have to ask yourself, what do you do now? Because if you've come to that conclusion and you've been dating someone for 6 months, maybe that's enough for you to go, this isn't the person for me. But if you've been married to that person for 10 years, I mean, okay. Well,
Yes.
what are we going to do? Okay. And I'm not even saying that I have the answer to, because who knows what it is and what it means to you and but it just, all I mean is that there are so many nuances to these decisions.
Yeah. And yet I think it's important to talk to young people about the reality check of what's happening online and what they're seeing online. What's really real and what they're seeing, because that the fear of the better option is just sadly not. It's not always better everywhere else.
It also makes me think, when they think of a better option, what is it that seems better? Because there's a real difference between I could have a better relationship, and what you mean by that is I could have a more fulfilling relationship, I could have a more meaningful relationship, I could have a more loving relationship, I could have a more supportive relationship, versus I could have a relationship that makes me feel more socially positioned in the public hierarchy of the world.
Yeah.
And when we're teenagers, it's very normal for us to view all relationships through this kind of social hierarchy. If I'm with this person, I look cool. If I'm with that person, I'll get made fun of. If I'm with this person that everybody wants, that will elevate my social status. And we can really sometimes get arrested there. And so when we're looking at things like, well, there's always someone more handsome. There's
Yeah.
always a friend that has, more to offer.
Yeah.
I think we have to talk to young people about being honest with themselves about, are you seeing a lack of value characteristics? Or are you yearning for the kind of like social status someone else could give you? What it would feel like to be on that person's arm, to have that person take you along on their life? Because those are two very different things.
Absolutely. I mean, your book is Who Deserves Your Love, right? And does a reader, ideally, from your perspective, learn when they buy your book?
I've kind of broken it out into 3 parts. And the idea is that when you read through part 1, you learn about that vulnerability cycle. You learn about how to kind of diagnose your relationships and what's going on in them. And you learn how to work on your side of that cycle. When you do that, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes things get better and that's all you really needed to do. But a lot of times in relationships, you now have to make some decisions. You've taken care of your side of the street. You know that you've done all you can do about your behavior. But now you need to make some decisions about theirs. And by the way, this book is not just for romantic relationships. It's for siblings and friends and coworkers and community in general and
So important.
parents and adult children. It's all of that, right?
Yeah.
So then you need to make some decisions. And what I've provided are these 6 questions in the form of a relationship decision tree, which are basically like the 6 questions that I would ask someone if I was their therapist to help them make a decision about what to do about this relationship. Do I end this relationship? Do I keep going in this relationship? And whichever of those I choose, how do I do that in a way that makes me feel like I am being a person of integrity? Either way. And then the third part of the book is all about boundaries. And it's basically equipping you with this idea of boundaries so that regardless of whatever decision you've made at the end of that decision tree, you can go out and make that decision and feel good about it and feel like you're doing the right thing by yourself and you're meeting your responsibilities to other people.
That's absolutely phenomenal. And I think that's such an interesting read. Thank you so much for that. There's one question I always ask, well, not always, but sometimes ask at the end of the show. And it's like, what do you do to manage your day every day to make it a better one?
That's a great question. Well, the first one is that I take medication.
Okay. Yeah.
I do. For a long time, I took SSRIs when I was struggling with postpartum depression, and now I take ADHD medicine. And I like to mention that because I think sometimes there's this idea that it's morally superior to have like the very enlightened coping skills. But the truth is that like medication is one of the most valid coping skills that we have, one of the most valid terms of self-care that we have.
Yeah.
And then the second one is I try to have a lot of self-compassion. And I find that self-compassion, some people are afraid that if they give themselves too much self-compassion, they'll be, quote, like letting themselves off the hook and they won't be accountable and they won't grow. And my experience has been the opposite. The more compassionate I am about the way my brain works and the things that I struggle with, the more I'm able to feel secure enough to deal with the anxiety of being radically accountable for my behavior.
Mm-hmm. And how does that look? Do you have affirmations or do you talk yourself in the mirror? How does that look?
So it can look different. And depending, like when I first started the journey, it looked very different than it does now, because now I think it's kind of an internal practice. But yeah, I used to literally put my hand on my heart and like tune in to kind of what my body was saying when I felt that kind of racing feeling and have to tell myself, nothing is wrong. Just because this feels urgent doesn't mean it is.
Okay.
Just because I feel rejected does not mean I'm in danger. Just because I feel pain doesn't mean that something is wrong or that I need to do anything right now. Like it is okay to just sit with myself, to tell myself it's okay to be human. And not in the like, it's okay to make quirky mistakes, but like, it's okay to make the big ones that you feel ashamed about. Everyone makes those.
Oh, yeah.
And I can either kind of spin out into a shame cycle and get preoccupied with how do I salve my shame, or I can let it pass because those feelings will pass. You don't actually you can just let them pass. And then I can focus on what changes I need to make so that I I am more proud of my behavior the next time around.
That's been so fantastic advice, so valuable. Thank you so much for taking your time today. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
There was so much great information there on how to approach our relationships and particularly how to set boundaries. There was also some really good advice about how to approach your life in online spaces and how to cope with what's going on there. You can find Casey's book, Who Deserves Your Love, wherever you get your books, and follow her at Struggle Care on social media. We'll link everything in the show notes. And whilst you're there, please hit follow. We have lots of other therapists and authors with great advice in other episodes of the podcast.